Greetings, traveler of time. Let the quiet of the past find you, no matter where you are right now, and allow the slow rhythm of this story to gently invite you into deep, well-earned rest. Close your eyes for a moment and feel the air, the soft breeze drifting across the southern lands of Gaul at the end of the 9th century, where the sun has already slipped away and the darkness of night gently wraps around the little village of Auvray. I am the old historian, keeper of medieval tales. If my stories bring you peace, then my voice has served its purpose. Now tell me, where does your listening echo from? The scent of burning firewood mixed with the damp smell of earth after a light afternoon rain hangs thick in the air, creating a comforting feeling of home, of shelter from the vast and uncertain world stretching beyond the barley fields. Even from a distance, you can almost feel the lingering warmth of the hearthstones, a quiet promise of comfort waiting just around the corner. And yet, despite the stillness that seems to settle over Auvray beneath the faint starlight, there's a subtle unease resting in the senses of anyone paying close attention, something the night isn't able to hide entirely. The distant raspy cough coming from the miller's house cuts through the calm, a sad sound quickly swallowed by the crackling of small fires and the final murmurs of villagers retreating into sleep. Underfoot, the ground of the narrow path feels uneven and firm, the packed earth mixed with scattered straw and a stubborn, unpleasant dampness, a reminder of the lack of proper paving and of what gets left there throughout the day. It's a sharp, almost acidic smell, something the wood smoke can't quite erase, an unavoidable signature of simple and often harsh medieval life. It's exactly this contrast of scents, the warmth of fresh bread rising from the communal kitchen and the persistent odor of waste thrown carelessly aside, that unsettles young Constanza, an 18-year-old peasant with a rare sensitivity to the subtleties of the world around her. While other girls accept the dirt as an inevitable part of life, Constanza feels a near physical aversion to disorder, almost as if her spirit rejects the idea that filth must be a constant companion. She watches, with a kind of painful awareness, the cloudy water in the main well, where runoff from the road mixes with whatever people bring in their hands and buckets. Constanza remembers her grandfather's teachings, a wanderer in his youth who once served as an assistant in a distant abbey, giving him access to forgotten manuscripts and old practices. He used to tell her, in a hushed, almost mystical tone, about the ancient Roman traditions of public baths and the importance of flowing clean water for the health of both body and soul. And even in the Middle Ages, bathing hadn't vanished completely. It simply became less common, and in some circles of the church even viewed with suspicion. Still, most monasteries and a few noble households maintained simple bathing rooms, luxuries ordinary peasants could hardly imagine. Her grandfather spoke of the art of purification, of boiling water with fragrant herbs to ward off bad humors, which people believed were the source of illness. According to medieval understanding, foul air, not dirt itself, caused sickness. Yet the habit of perfuming water and rooms with herbs was, unknowingly, a small step toward hygiene. He taught her the name of each plant and the right way to crush it, a knowledge she treasured quietly, even as she felt powerless to apply it in the wide, messy world around her. Her gaze drifts down the village's main pathway, which looks even darker and more distorted under the trembling light of a few torches. She notices a thin pig nosing through scraps tossed near her door, a sight so common that it now startles her less, but disgusts her more. It's an endless cycle, the animal rooting through filth, flies swarming around the waste, and soon after, the same villagers drawing water from a contaminated well, never connecting one thing to another. To them, illness was God's wrath or the work of evil spirits, something fought with prayers and amulets, not with brooms or buckets. This resignation presses on her more heavily than anything else. The weight of all this settles inside her chest, making it hard to take an easy breath. She smells the old straw, the sour sweat clinging to her clothes that haven't been washed in days due to lack of water. She touches her hands and feels how rough her skin has become, how dirt clings beneath her nails. And she wonders what it would be like if the village water ran clear and abundant like the mountain streams, bright, cold, and alive. It's a simple dream, one that keeps her awake through long nights of restlessness. The only sensory relief Constanza finds is the sound of cicadas, a steady, vibrant chorus that acts like a blanket of white noise, muffling the village's unpleasant sounds. She focuses on that rhythm, letting it coax her into a fragile, temporary calm, as though nature itself were humming a lullaby for her troubled spirit. Through the narrow view of her wooden window, she sees the silhouette of the church tower, dark, solid, and seemingly untouched by the earthly chaos below. It stands as a symbol of higher order, even if that order feels far from reach. This longing for order amid disorder is what drives her, a spark of resistance she can't quiet. She knows that throughout history, concerns about cleanliness have risen and fallen, and that great civilizations once had far better practices than hers. Even so, the realization that her village didn't need a miracle, but a simple, practical change, cleanliness, felt revolutionary, though she still lacked the courage to voice it aloud. For now, she observes and plans, weaving a quiet blueprint for transformation in her mind. As the night deepens, the air grows colder and wetter, seeping into the bones. Constanza curls beneath her rough wool blanket, feeling the heaviness of the village's tightly closed windows that trap stale air and unpleasant odors. She thinks about how long people spend inside these stuffy rooms, warmed by embers and breathing the same stagnant air, and wonders how they manage to live without surrendering completely to illness, a question that modern science would only answer centuries later. To Constanza, bathing isn't just a matter of cleanliness, it's a small ritual of renewal. She secretly learned to mix wood ash, unknowingly rich in potassium, acting like primitive soap, with animal fat to create a paste that could lightly clean the skin. It's not the luxurious foam of Roman baths, but it's a beginning, a quiet act of resistance against the overwhelming grime. She keeps her little bar of soap wrapped in cloth like a precious treasure to use when she slips away to a hidden stream beyond the village. A deep, nearly tangible silence follows the fading nighttime murmurs, a silence that feels a lot like loneliness. Constanza longs for someone who understands her vision, someone who feels the urgency of a cleaner, healthier life. But her ideas are often seen as strange, even dangerous, by those who view dirt as a mark of humility and rejection of worldly vanity. Her struggle isn't only against filth, it's against culture itself, and that makes her isolation even sharper. She turns on her straw mattress, which lets out a dry, rustling sound, and closes her eyes, forcing her mind to picture beauty instead of decay. She imagines the village square swept clean, the main well lined with pale stones, and the water sparkling under the sun like a mirror of purity, reflecting the villagers' smiles. It's poetic and nearly impossible, but it's the one refuge she has from the oppressive reality around her. This ability to dream of what doesn't yet exist, to imagine a future shaped by order and clarity, is her greatest strength. While most accept illness as fate, Constanza sees it as a challenge to be solved. She hears the miller's cough again and, for the first time, feels less disgust and more resolve. His sickness becomes proof that filth and disorder aren't nuisances, they're enemies. She needs to act, and the first step will be convincing the blacksmith, Guilhem, the village's most skeptical and influential man. Her eyes settle on the wavering shadow of a leafless tree cast by the moonlight on her wall. It flickers and dances with every breeze, as if beckoning her to step outside and leave her worries behind. But she stays put. Her place is here, in the dark, planning light. The wood smoke that used to feel comforting now reminds her of the fire she needs to ignite in people's hearts, a fire of indignation and desire for change. She breathes deeply, letting the cold dawn air fill her lungs, rehearsing the words she'll use when speaking to Guillem. Her argument for cleanliness must be stronger than the weight of tradition. The dry rustle of the straw mattress is the last sound she hears before sleep begins to pull her under. She recalls a story her grandfather once told her about the plague of Justinian, a devastating epidemic that swept through the Eastern Roman Empire in the 6th century. He believed the disaster was worsened by the neglect of the cities, an idea Constanza now sees as a powerful persuasion tool. And so, caught between the light of memory and the shadow of reality, Constanza begins her quiet transformation. Her first task is to convince others that the beauty of order is stronger than the ugliness of chaos, and that cleanliness, at its core, is an act of love and respect for oneself and the community. The rough wool blanket brushing against her skin is the last thing she feels before sleep finally takes her. A soft breeze drifts through the tiny gap in her window, carrying the scent of dew and fresh earth, the smell of renewal, whispering a promise of cleaner, healthier days. May your rest be as peaceful as the image of a quiet morning in Ovray, a village still asleep, unaware of the change about to awaken. The cool morning mist carries a faint sweetness of fresh hay, mingled with the strong scent of animals in the pen, slowly waking Constanza from her restless sleep, where purity was a landscape she could walk through, not a distant dream to chase. She rises from her straw bed, feeling the stiffness in her body and the chill seeping from the clay and wood walls. And the first thing her eyes land on is the thin layer of greyish dust resting on the small wooden crate that serves as her only table. Even indoors, dirt is an uninvited guest, a constant reminder of the outside world that touches everything and everyone. Her morning routine is an exercise in resignation. She puts on the same thick wool tunic she wore yesterday, since the water needed for washing clothes is scarce and precious, saved mostly for cooking and only rarely for personal hygiene. Curiously, in much of the medieval world, simply changing one's outer garments was considered more important for masking unpleasant odors than taking a full bath in water. Layers of clothing absorbed most of the visible dirt, while whatever lay underneath was tolerated. Constanza, however, longs for the feeling of clean linen against her skin, a luxury she has barely known. As she steps outside, she is immediately met by the sounds and smells of a waking village. The coarse creak of wooden doors opening, the clucking of chickens wandering freely through the narrow paths, and above all, the unmistakable, powerful smell of fresh manure dragged through the streets by the first ox carts, mixing with the damp soil of dawn. The touch of the cold, wet wind on her face makes her shiver, yet she walks with purpose toward the communal fountain, where the main well sits like the beating heart of the village, giving life and, unfortunately, spreading sickness. As she approaches, Constanza notices a cluster of women with buckets and clay pots, all waiting their turn to draw the cloudy water. She watches how their containers are set on the damp ground, how unwashed hands grip the ropes, and how the surface dirt is inevitably stirred up each time the water is pulled. Her gaze lingers on the narrow runoff channel beside the well, a crude groove in the earth used to dump dirty vegetable washing water and, worse, the urine and waste of nearby animals. It's a fragile drainage system that guarantees the well's water is constantly recontaminated. A curious memory from her grandfather returns to her. his stories about the customs of the Moors and the Byzantines, who, influenced by Greco-Roman traditions, kept sophisticated public baths and sewage systems long after Western Europe had abandoned them. The stark contrast between the knowledge preserved in distant lands and the ignorance in Auvray fuels her frustration and her desire for change. Constanza believes that the salvation of her village lies, paradoxically, in the distant past and in forgotten practices. It's in this landscape of waterborne disorder that she spots Guillem, the blacksmith, a man of 40, broad-shouldered and calloused, respected not only for his strength but for his practical skepticism. He stands near his forge, breathing in coal smoke and the metallic scent of hot iron, and Constanza feels a flicker of anxiety. She knows her approach must be subtle, grounded in what he can see and feel, not in sermons. She walks toward him with her empty pot and greets him with a nod, her attention caught by something she hadn't noticed before, a swollen, infected wound on his forearm, red and hot, which he tries to hide beneath the leather of his apron. This is the opening she has been waiting for, a visible reflection of the invisible contamination she wants to fight. Even in the morning chill, the heat radiating from his skin is unmistakable. Constanza begins to speak, not of moral impurity, but of physical filth that weakens the body. She uses the language of cause and effect. She describes the well water, comparing it to a cloudy broth, and uses simple metaphors. Iron forged in clean water is stronger, Master Guillem. The body is no different. If the water that nourishes it is foul, its strength fades, and the flesh breaks. She lets the sound of the runoff channel, a steady trickle of dirty water, underline her point, a constant whisper of contamination. Guillem listens with a furrowed brow and spits on the ground, a habit so common it almost makes her sigh, since it adds to the very dirt she's warning him about. He argues that his parents and grandparents drank the same water and lived their lives just fine, and that illness is fate. He invokes the theory of humours, insisting that his swollen wound is simply an excess of yellow bile, something a good bloodletter would fix, a common but often ineffective medical practice of the Middle Ages. Constanza doesn't challenge the theory itself. Instead, she goes straight to the cause. She shows him the herbs her grandfather taught her to boil, rosemary, sage, and chamomile, explaining that they don't cure illness, but keep the rot in the water at bay, a phrase simple enough for him to accept. She convinces him to heat a bit of water in a small iron pot and add the herbs, just so he can wash the wound, promising that the pleasant scent and the relief he'll feel will help him sleep better. She uses the strong herbal aroma rising from the pot as a sensory contrast to the foul smells of the village, a sharp reminder of mountain air and cleanliness that he hasn't felt in years. The fragrant steam spreads through the forge, briefly replacing the smell of coal, and Guillem inhales deeply, sensing something different. It's a small victory, just enough to crack open the idea that illness isn't punishment, but consequence. The warmth of the water and the gentle touch of the softened leaves on his wound make him relax. Constanza doesn't mention bathing at all. She focuses only on the visible relief, the simple act of cleaning. She tells him that if the village well were cleaned and the drainage channel redirected, everyone would feel the same comfort his arm is feeling now. The blacksmith, still skeptical but no longer closed off, agrees to consider her proposal, but only if she can prove that the water from a distant stream is stronger than the wells. He challenges her to bring back a sample from the stream and wash her hands with both waters so he can see the difference himself. Constanza smiles, knowing the proof lies in the water's colour and the way it feels, mud versus crystal. The murmur of the women at the well grows louder, and Constanza steps away from Guillem, feeling the weight of the task ahead. She must go to the stream. The sun is already high, yet the village remains shrouded in the shadows of disorder and heavy smells. Constanza takes a deep breath, feeling the texture of renewed hope settling inside her. And the poetic image that closes this first part is the small iron pot beside Guillem's forge, still warm and releasing the scent of purifying herbs, a tiny beacon of cleanliness in the long, dark landscape of centuries-old filth. The call of the forest, with its clean scent of pine, damp earth and cool moss, is an immediate relief for Constanza after enduring the heavy atmosphere of Auvray. The walk to the nearest stream, a small branch of the main river untouched by the village's waste, is her refuge, a tactile exercise in reconnecting with nature. She feels the roughness of dry leaves beneath her leather shoes, the fresh, pure air filling her lungs, and the soft sound of running water growing clearer with every step, a sound she has long associated with the promise of purification. The morning sun, already high, filters through the treetops, scattering golden patches of light on the forest floor and creating a poetic contrast with the lingering shadows clinging to the thicker trunks. When she reaches the stream's edge, the sight of the water feels almost miraculous. She kneels, sinking into the cool, moist earth, and watches the water closely. It's transparent, so clear she can see the smooth, round stones beneath, each covered in a veil of light green moss. The gentle tapping of water against those stones forms a steady, hypnotic rhythm, a lullaby sung by nature itself, soothing the restlessness she carries inside. She dips her hands into the current, feeling the shock of cold water on her warm skin, and the sensation is so invigorating she lets out a quiet sigh of pleasure. This is the first essential piece of her mission, the physical proof of purity. As she fills her 2 clay jars with the crystal-clear water, a soft historical memory surfaces, one her grandfather once shared. During the Carolingian period in the 8th century, Emperor Charlemagne was known for encouraging cleanliness, even building baths in his palace at Aachen and promoting herb gardens for medicinal and hygienic purposes. The memory brings a rush of hope, proof that cleanliness wasn't a modern idea, but a European tradition lost over time, one that could perhaps be revived. If a great king had valued clean water, then surely her battle in humble Auvray had meaning. She observes the stream again and notices tiny aquatic larvae and insects drifting with the current, a sign of a living, healthy ecosystem. She sets 1 jar of pure water beside the empty jar she brought from home, the one still lined with a thin layer of dried sludge from the village well. The visual contrast is startling. 1 jar clear and glimmering, the other dull and brownish-grey. A quiet, natural mystery, how the water in the village could harm while this water could heal, is exactly what she hopes to reveal to the others. Lifting the clean jar to her nose, she breathes in its neutral mineral scent, an aroma of stone and purity, nothing like the heavy, almost metallic stench of the stagnant well water. She thinks that if people could simply smell the difference, they'd be convinced. The texture of the pure water, when she touches it again, feels light and smooth as it slips between her fingers, leaving no residue, a sensation she wishes everyone could experience and associate with well-being. On her way back, the weight of the jars becomes a physical burden, but also a symbolic one, filling her with a quiet sense of responsibility. She knows she isn't just carrying water, she's carrying proof. She walks slowly, listening to the forest, the distant cry of a hawk, the rustle of leaves beneath the feet of some small creature, and allows the rhythm of her steps and the stillness of the morning to help her organize her thoughts as she prepares the argument she'll bring to Guillem. As she nears the village again, the smell of wood smoke and trash grows stronger, hitting her like a sudden wave. She feels the warmth of stone beneath her feet, the ground already heated by the morning sun. The shift in sensory atmosphere strengthens her resolve. She decides to head straight to Gilliam's forge before the hardness of the day settles into his mood. When she arrives, the blacksmith is already at work, hammering a glowing piece of iron against the anvil. The loud clanging of metal is jarring, a violent contrast to the serenity of the forest. The scent of burning metal and coal fills the air, but she notices something else. He has been using the herbal water to clean his workspace, a small sign that her suggestion the night before had left its mark. Holding the jars tightly, her heart beats fast, though her voice remains calm. She says nothing at first. Instead, she sets the two clay jars on the packed earth side by side. One holds the cloudy well water he knows well, the other the sparkling water from the stream. She invites him, with a quiet gesture, to pause and simply look. The morning sunlight hits both samples, and the contrast speaks louder than anything she could say. He sees the settled sludge at the bottom of the first jar and the uninterrupted clarity of the second. Guillem hesitates. He wipes his hands on his leather trousers and slowly crouches down to touch the water. He dips a finger into the murky well water, feeling its sandy grit, then does the same with the stream water, where the sensation of freshness and lightness is undeniable. This is the moment of fluidity Constanza hoped for, the tactile proof that dissolves resistance. She doesn't need words. The water speaks for her. Then she gently suggests he use the pure water to clean his wound, something he agrees to, and the wave of relief he feels becomes an argument far stronger than logic ever could. Guillem's quiet acceptance is the turning point Constanza needed, an unspoken sign that sensory evidence had finally softened his deeply rooted skepticism. He doesn't offer praise, but the simple act of choosing the stream water to wash the wound on his arm instead of using the well water is, in itself, a powerful endorsement of her cause. The touch of the cool water seems to soothe the inflammation, and as the blacksmith feels that immediate relief, he looks at Constanza with a new kind of respect, not admiration, but the practical acknowledgement of a problem solved. He mutters something about the difference in smell and texture, focusing on what he can directly feel, and that alone is enough for Constanza. She takes advantage of this small opening and, in a slow and deliberate rhythm, begins to share her vision. She explains that the water isn't bad by nature. The problem lies in how the village treats it. She uses the image of a wineskin. If the skin is dirty, even the finest wine will sour. She compares the well to that wineskin. She suggests that the first step should be to empty the well entirely, remove the thick layer of sludge at the bottom, and line it with smooth stones to prevent surface runoff, loaded with waste, from seeping back in. Guillem's sense of smell is already inclined to agree. The sour odor of stagnant water had become unbearable in those hot days. The blacksmith, ever practical, raises the first objections: labor, the neighbor's resistance, and the old superstition that disturbing the well might anger the water spirits and bring drought. Constanza counters the superstition with a practical appeal to authority. She reminds him that the monks from the nearby abbey, where her grandfather once served, washed their robes and prepared their remedies only with spring water, kept strictly reserved for such purposes, and they were the healthiest and longest-lived men in the region. She frames cleanliness as an act of devotion, disguising hygiene as piety. To convince the villagers, Constanza proposes a communal demonstration. Instead of merely talking about cleaning the well, she suggests building something new, a small, simple bathhouse near the stream, made from logs and covered with straw, where people could heat water and wash themselves with the aromatic herbs she grows in her small garden. She presents the bath not as a luxury, but as a treatment for tired skin and weary muscles, appealing to the comforting, tactile pleasure of warm water. The idea of the bathhouse is a masterstroke. It shifts the conversation away from the shame of past filth and toward the promise of future comfort. Guilhem brightens at the thought of the construction, already calculating how much wood and effort it would require. The practical sound of his planning begins to drown out the buzzing of flies around the forge. To him, it becomes less about hygiene and more about engineering, a project he can shape, lead, and take pride in. Together, they begin walking through the village, with Guilhem taking on the role of spokesman, lending his authority and strength to Constance's fragile idea. They use the blacksmith's wound, now cleaner and less inflamed, as a visible testimony to the power of clean water and herbs. The sense of progress, the sight of the village skeptic becoming a defender of cleanliness, sparks murmurs of curiosity among the peasants still drifting through their morning routine. Constanza reinforces their message with small pieces of knowledge. She explains, for instance, the medieval custom of using scented soaps made from goat fat and beech ash, a practice rare among the poor but known in cities and among merchants. She tells them this isn't her invention, but a revival of ancient secrets of well-being, making the change feel like a return to forgotten wisdom rather than a dangerous new idea. The sound of Guilhem's hammer, now striking the anvil with a steadier, more hopeful rhythm, becomes the heartbeat of change in the village. He commits to starting the well cleaning the next morning and leading the construction of the bathhouse. He asks Constanza to gather the herbs and provide the knowledge needed to make the heated water as healing as possible. Constanza smiles, feeling the sun warm her face, a warmth that isn't only physical but emotional, the warmth of hope. The weight of the empty jars is gone, replaced by a new lightness in her spirit. The village's sour stench is still there, but the soft fragrance of the herbs in her apron feels stronger now, whispering a promise of future cleansing. It's a moment of deep, serene contemplation. Constanza walks away to begin harvesting her herbs, leaving Guilhem alone with the sound of his hammer and the 2 jars of water, the clean beside the dirty. Their contrast is a mirror for the village itself, which now stands at a crossroads: continue drinking filth or fight for purity. The silence left behind in her footsteps is filled by the steady rhythm of the blacksmith's work, a beat of building and renewal. The sun on the following day in the small village of Auvray shines with a dry heat, but the air is filled with an unusual sense of anticipation. The quiet rhythm of peasant life is broken by the metallic clatter of shovels and hoes, as Guilhem and a small group of men, persuaded by the blacksmith's account of the relief in his wound, make their way toward the main well. Constanza watches from a distance as she gathers her medicinal herbs, feeling the earth beneath her feet. The strong scent of rosemary and sage on her hands stands in sharp contrast to the heavier, unpleasant smell of damp mud and fermentation now rising from the village square. Deepening the cleaning effort proves harder than anyone expected. As the men empty the well, the sound of water being hauled up in buckets, set aside for use in the fields, reveals the thick, dark sludge at the bottom. Years of organic waste and runoff from the village slowly settling into the source. The odor that rises from the well is pungent and nauseating, a smell of decay and stagnation so strong it drives curious onlookers away. Ironically, this raw, undeniable display of visible filth is what begins to persuade the skeptics more than any argument could. A ripple of old superstition emerges when one of the peasants, old Thierry, recalls a legend about the well, that it never ran dry because an ancient saint had blessed it, and cleaning it would be a sacrilege that might make the water vanish. Constanza steps in gently, not to deny the blessing but to reinterpret it. She explains that the saint's gift was not in the dirt, but in the clean water he wanted them to drink. She points to the sludge and says that if they wish to honor the saint, they should honor the purity of his blessing. In doing so, she turns religious language into support for practical hygiene, something crucial in medieval life. While the men work, Constanza turns her attention to the bathhouse project. She walks back to the stream, breathing in the pure forest air once more, and begins marking out the site. She chooses a slightly elevated spot, shielded from the wind, and uses branches and stones to outline the small structure. In her mind, she already imagines the warm steam rising inside, the gentle scent of lavender, and the sense of well-being it could offer. The cool, damp air of the morning makes her think of how comforting warm baths would feel in winter. The sound of work at the well carries through the forest, a steady rhythm of hammering, lifting, and shouts of effort. To Constanza, it's the most beautiful music. She remembers a genuine fact about medieval life. In large European cities like Paris and London, there were estuvans, public bathhouses where people not only washed, but also socialized and conducted business. She realizes that Auvrey's bathhouse could become more than a place of cleanliness. It could become a new center of community. The next challenge is figuring out how to heat the water. Later in the day, Guillaume joins her, covered in dirt and exhaustion, but glowing with satisfaction. He recounts the sheer amount of filth removed from the well and admits that contamination had been inevitable. Using his practical thinking, he suggests building an outdoor fire and heating large stones, which could then be dropped into barrels of water to warm them slowly, a simple and effective technique. Constanza feels his hand lightly touch her shoulder, a gesture of approval, a sign that their partnership is now firm. She emphasizes the importance of choosing the right herbs to ensure the bath not only cleans the skin, but soothes it and keeps insects away. She describes the smell of myrrh and chamomile that will fill the bathhouse, an aroma of health that, according to popular belief, would drive away the bad airs that caused illness. Seeing the once skeptical blacksmith defending cleanliness with the same passion he brings to forging iron feels like a triumph. The work on the well lasts the entire day, and the sight of it cleared, its stone walls more visible, its bottom lined with smooth pebbles, is the first tangible sign of change in the village. As the sun sets, Constanza feels its fading warmth and the deep satisfaction of work well done. The exhaustion from cleaning the well shows in the slow, heavy steps of the men as they scatter at dusk, yet their satisfaction settles over them like a warm blanket, softening their fatigue. Guillaume, his clothes soaked in mud, but his spirit light, proudly shows Constanza the well's new structure, its bottom cleared and its stone walls sealed to prevent surface runoff from seeping in. The scent of clean earth and fresh water, still faintly mixed with the lingering odor of mud, is noticeably better, an olfactory improvement everyone can sense. Constanza runs her fingers along the damp stones, feeling their rough texture, and realizes how the day's physical effort has turned into something tangible and lasting. The focus then shifts to building the bathhouse. The next morning, the whole village moves into action. Not out of obligation, but out of a shared sense of purpose. Guillaume and the strongest men begin cutting and carrying logs, and the rhythmic sound of axes echoes through the forest, a noise not of destruction, but of creation. Constanza and the women gather large bundles of hay and straw for the roof and prepare the purifying herbs. This division of labor brings a sense of unity the village hasn't felt in years, a collective movement toward a common goal. Curiosity deepens as the project grows. Constanza explains to the women that in the 13th century, many monasteries and convents had specific rules about bathing, often reserved for special occasions such as Christmas or Easter, yet the washing of hands and feet before and after meals was a daily mandatory practice. She tells them that the bathhouse isn't only for full-body bathing, it's also a place to make washing the extremities easier, a small act of devotion that honors the body. The slow, descriptive pace of construction allows Constanza to notice the shift in their attitudes. The women, skeptical at first, soon fall in love with the scent of the herbs, lavender, calendula, and linden, that Constanza teaches them to use in making perfume soaps by mixing them with fat and ash. They begin to see that bathing doesn't need to be a cold, rushed ritual, but a moment of sensory comfort. The sweet, calming fragrance and the warm water soothing their rough, cracked skin. The sight of the wooden hut taking shape, rustic but full of promise, feeds this growing hope. Guillem stands out as the project's leader, crafting an ingenious setup, a simple stone stove where water can be heated in large iron cauldrons and poured into wooden tubs. He builds a small wooden channel to guide the used bath water to a distant pit, far from the stream, ensuring that contamination won't repeat itself. The sound of clean water flowing, even in small amounts, feels like a triumph to everyone involved. The chapter closes with the serene contemplation of the first communal bath. At nightfall, the hut is ready, the fire is burning outside, and aromatic steam from the herbs begins to escape through the wooden slats. The scent of smoke and herbs blends into a fragrance of health, gently overtaking the village's usual odors. The children are the first to enter, and their delighted squeals as they feel the warm, soft water create a ripple of joy that spreads through the adults watching them. Constanza steps back, observing the scene from a distance. She seeks no credit, only change. The sight of steam rising toward the early moon becomes a poetic image of purification, a cycle of warmth and freshness that cleanses not just the skin, but the soul of the community. She feels the warmth of the night, the scent of herbs, and a deep, quiet peace settling over her. The sun, rising on the third day, finds Constanza in a moment of transition and movement, a shift that carries her from the rustic edges of Auvray to the heart of a local trade centre, the weekly market in the nearby town of Vaucresson. The purpose of her trip is purely practical. She needs more seeds of rare herbs to supply the new bathhouse and a larger glass jar to store her mixtures, items the village simply doesn't offer. She walks along the dirt road, feeling the warmth of the early sun on the back of her neck and the sweet, earthy scent of dew evaporating quickly into the air. The distance is considerable, but the satisfaction of seeing cleanliness take root in her own village fuels her for the long journey. The sensory impact of arriving in Vaucresson is immediate and overwhelming. The city's soundscape is a constant loud hum, a chorus of merchants shouting prices, cartwheels creaking and horses snorting impatiently, a violent contrast to Auvray's quiet mornings. Her nose is assaulted by a dense mixture of smells, exotic spices, tanned leather, accumulated human sweat, and the metallic odor of dried fish, all floating beneath the rising heat. The market's visual landscape is an explosion of color, with dyed fabrics and rare fruits displayed on makeshift stalls. The architecture of Vaucresson reveals an interesting detail about medieval urban hygiene. Though larger and more prosperous than Auvray, the town's crowded layout concentrates its filth in different ways. Constanza notices the open drainage channels running down the middle of narrow streets, used both for rainwater and liquid waste, a system more organized than her own villages, yet still a clear source of contamination. She remembers that it was common practice in medieval towns to toss trash and chamber pot waste out of windows, something she finds shockingly careless, even with her humble rural perspective. As she searches for the herb stall, Constanza witnesses a brief scene that unsettles her. A well-dressed woman, likely the wife of a merchant, faints inside her litter, overwhelmed by heat and stench. A local apothecary is called, and he immediately prescribes a treatment based on the theory of humours, spraying vinegar essences and herbal perfumes to drive away the bad airs he believes caused her collapse. Constanza quietly thinks the real cause wasn't the air, but the accumulated filth in the streets and the lack of ventilation inside the shuttered townhouses. Her path leads her to the spice section, where the sharp, penetrating scent of cinnamon and ginger temporarily masks the city's foul odour. She feels the smooth texture of mustard seeds slipping between her fingers as she tests their quality, and she buys a handful of cardamom, an expensive spice she plans to use in the bathhouse to create an exotic fragrance, elevating the act of washing into something almost noble. She finally finds the apothecary woman Isolde, middle-aged, bright-eyed, selling dried herbs and small vials of essential oils. Isolde is surprised when Constanza asks for large quantities of sage, calendula, and linden, herbs frequently used, but rarely in such scale. With calm composure, Constanza explains the bathhouse project in Auvray, describing how they cleaned the well and redirected the wastewater, and the immediate positive impact on the villagers' health. Isolde listens closely, feeling the warmth of the sun filtering through the cloth canopy of her stall, and shows genuine interest. After all, she deals daily with the consequences of poor hygiene, treating wounds and skin infections that could often be prevented. The conversation with Isolde deepens, and Constanza feels a rare sense of connection as the apothecary shares her aversion to the city's bad airs and her belief in the healing power of plants. Feeling the sun grow hotter and the market smells heavier and more nauseating, Isolde offers Constanza a small cup of cold peppermint infusion. Its fresh, penetrating aroma is an immediate relief to the senses, and the cool clay cup against her hands brings a brief moment of serenity amid the chaos of the market. Isolde shares a curious detail about hygiene. She explains that for many wealthy people of the time, especially in noble courts, bathing had become far less frequent than in antiquity, and perfume was used excessively to mask body odor, a habit she finds both ineffective and misleading. She insists that true purification begins with water and finishes with essences, not the other way around. Constanza sees the irony clearly. The city, so proud of its wealth and trade, is in many ways far filthier in its habits than the humble village she is trying to transform. The apothecary gifts Constanza a small booklet of bath oil recipes, written on thin parchment, detailing the correct proportion of each herb and the right way to boil water to extract the maximum healing properties. She urges Constanza to use the word treatment instead of bath when describing the bathhouse, appealing to a medieval mindset that viewed hot water more as medicine than cleanliness. With the seeds purchased, the parchment manual tucked safely away, and the large gleaming glass jar wrapped carefully, Constanza begins her journey back to Auvray. The shift is immediate. She leaves behind the noise and agitation of the town and steps back into the quiet simplicity of the countryside. She walks slowly, feeling the afternoon warmth settling on her body and the comforting weight of her new supplies, symbols of the project she's now certain will endure. The dusty scent of the road gradually replaces the heavy aromas of the marketplace. The image of the fair and its persistent filth reinforces her mission. She realizes that poor hygiene isn't born from poverty, but from neglect and a lack of practical knowledge. The dirt in Vaucresson, though different in form, is just as dangerous as the dirt in Auvray, and that understanding strengthens her appreciation for the effort her small community has begun. In the distance, she catches the familiar scent of wood smoke rising from the village, but this time there's something new, something gentler. The faint, sweet fragrance of simmering sage and calendula blends with the smoke, a clear sign that the bathhouse is being used. Children's laughter drifts through the air from the direction of the stream where the new structure was built, and the sound fills her with peace. When she reaches Auvray, she finds Guillem and several men working to redirect the wastewater from the communal sink away from the well, using hollowed wooden logs as rudimentary drainage pipes. The sight of this new order, this collective effort toward cleanliness, fills Constanza with a deep sense of belonging and accomplishment. Her journey ends with the sight of her village, still rustic, still simple, yet now carrying a faint glow of order and care. The smell of hearth smoke, once heavy and stale, now mixes with the perfume of herbs. Constanza lies down in her bed, feeling the quiet touch of satisfaction and the certainty that change, though slow, has become irreversible. The gentle morning light in Auvray filters softly into Constanza's small home, and she begins her day with an intimate, focused gaze on a simple object, one that has become central to her new routine, the glass jar she brought from Vaucresson. Glass, rare and precious for most peasants, gleams with a warm amber reflection, holding the first concentrated mixture of linden and calendula oils, prepared to soften the skin after bathing. She lifts the jar, feeling its cool, smooth weight in her hands, and breathes in the sweet, herbal fragrance rising from it, a scent of care that had never existed in this place before. The smoothness of the glass against the roughness of her skin becomes a constant reminder of the transformation she has set in motion. Her attention centers on a gesture, a habit just beginning to take root, uncorking the jar and rubbing a small amount of oil onto her hands and neck. It is a slow, poetic ritual, a quiet moment of self-care woven into a life once dedicated solely to rustic labor. She performs the gesture unhurriedly, spreading the oil with her fingertips, massaging it gently into the skin, feeling the warmth created by the friction, letting the fragrance melt into her. Though brief, this routine is an act of resistance, a quiet defiance against the dirt and disorder that still linger around the village. This attention to the body and to cleanliness was, surprisingly, a real historical habit, one often overlooked by historians focused on the major cities. In women's monasteries and some isolated rural communities, the preparation of healing oils and herbal ointments for skin care and wound treatment was common, often tied to local medicine and simple pharmacy work. Without knowing it, Constanza was reviving a monastic custom, bringing the convent's sense of care into peasant life. She remembers Isolde, the apothecary, who told her that true luxury wasn't found in the price of spices, but in the consistency of habits. The repetition of this simple gesture, the act of nourishing the skin with a perfumed oil, is exactly what Constanza hopes to instill in her community, the idea that cleanliness is a way of honoring oneself. The soft, steady wind outside accompanies her slow movements, wrapping the moment in a quiet, reflective calm. Later that morning, she carries her jar to the new bathhouse, now fully in use. The inside of the wooden hut is warm and humid, heavy with the scent of steam mixed with linden and chamomile essences. The feel of warm air against her face and the slightly damp, heated floor beneath her bare feet bring instant relief and comfort. The muted sound of laughter and gentle conversation drifting through the walls tells her the community has begun embracing the new ritual. Constanza watches an older man, Bernard, a peasant known for his stubbornness and aversion to any sort of innovation, step into the bathhouse. He enters hesitantly, visibly uncomfortable with the idea of undressing in a shared space, but the soft, herbal scent and the promise of relief for his aching back slowly win him over. The subtle contrast between his unease as he enters and the serenity she knows he'll feel when he steps back out is the greatest reward Constanza could hope for. Seeing Bernard, the most stubborn man in the village, finally surrender to the cleansing ritual fills Constanza with a deep sense of belonging. Not as an observer, but as the very spark that ignited change. She sits on the threshold of the bathhouse, feeling the warm steam settle onto her skin and breathing in the sweet herbal scent as she waits. She knows that resistance is nothing more than fear of the unfamiliar, and that physical comfort is the most persuasive argument. The moment is contemplative. The muffled chatter and soft splashing inside blend with the slow hum of bees drifting among the calendula blossoms she planted around the hut. As she waits, Constanza reflects on a historical detail that captures the medieval ambivalence toward water. Even though full-body baths were less common, washing the hands before and after meals was a valued social custom among the nobility and even among monks, often performed with a servant pouring water from a jug over one's hands. This emphasis on visible, symbolic cleanliness existed side by side with the acceptance of general bodily dirt. And now, Constanza was extending that partial, ritualized cleanliness to the whole body. Her daily habit of preparing oils and herbs slowly becomes its own small spectacle. She uses the glass jar as a symbol of her craft, an object that catches the sunlight and reflects the purity she wishes to bring forth. The village children, drawn by the sweet scent, approach with wide, curious eyes as she stirs the oil with the tip of a wooden spoon, an almost hypnotic ritual of simple alchemy. She lets them smell the herbs, encouraging them to use their sense of smell, teaching them to associate the strong, clean fragrance of the plants with health. Bernard emerges from the bathhouse after about half an hour, his skin flushed from the heat and his hair dripping and steaming. The contrast between his appearance before and after is striking. The face that had been tight with tension is now relaxed, and he walks with a lightness he hadn't shown in years. He says nothing directly to Constanza, but the warmth in his eyes and the faint smile tugging at his lips are his way of thanking her, a silent acknowledgement of the relief he felt. The soft, fragrant feel of his skin is the final proof. Once Bernard's transformation becomes visible, the other hesitant villagers begin to give in. More people make their way toward the bathhouse, and Guillaume has to hurry to keep the heated water flowing. The sound of communal work has changed into the sound of service, not obligation. Buckets of clear water carried carefully from the stream become a new normal, a simple rhythm of shared care. The impact of this growing habit soon shows itself in the village's health. The miller's harsh, nighttime cough, once constant, fades. The rashes and skin sores common among the children grow less frequent. Constanza knows it isn't a miracle, it's cause and effect. Clean water, clean bodies, and a less contaminated environment. At the end of the day, Constanza withdraws to her home, carrying the fullness of her work within her. She stores her glass jar away, feeling not only its weight, but the significance it now holds. Her sense of belonging in Auvray is complete. She is no longer the strange young woman who asks too many questions, but the quiet benefactor who brought health. The final image is the bathhouse gently releasing its steam into the moonlit sky, a beacon of cleanliness rising in the darkness. The broadening of the narrative becomes clear the next morning, when Constanza realizes that the change is no longer confined to the bathhouse or the well. It has spread to the entire community, reshaping how the people of Auvray interact with the space around them. The scent of dried herbs and fresh-cut wood, once an anomaly, now blends more gently with the familiar smells of earth and smoke, creating a more pleasant, almost comforting fragrance that hangs over the village. She feels the broom of bundled twigs against her palms and notices that the women are sweeping not only their doorsteps but also the narrow lanes, a gesture that subtly links private care to collective well-being. The focus is no longer simply on cleaning, but on preventing. Constanza joins Guillaume in a new endeavor, building a small stone pen set apart from the houses and far from the well to confine the pigs and other domestic animals that once wandered freely, leaving droppings everywhere. The sound of stones being fitted together and the gritty scrape of mortar made from lime and sand for sturdiness becomes the sound of order being imposed on animal chaos. This initiative touches on a social and economic curiosity. In medieval times, domestic animals, especially pigs, were often raised loose in villages and even in cities. They acted as a primitive garbage disposal, consuming whatever organic waste was thrown into the streets. Confining them, although more hygienic, requires the villagers to spend extra time handling waste properly, a shift in habit that affects their daily economy and rhythm of work. Linking the individual to the communal, Constanza and Guillem propose a practical solution for managing manure. Digging a large pit, lined with clay, far from the village, where all animal and human waste would be taken. Once dried and aged, this material would become fertilizer for the barley and wheat fields, a cycle of life in which filth, once a threat to health, becomes a valuable agricultural resource. With his practical mind, the blacksmith explains that dirt, when handled wisely, transforms into wealth. The village begins to look different. Children who once played in the mud and among the droppings are now encouraged to go to the stream with their mothers to wash their hands and faces, a new habit settling into their daily life. Constanza notices that their clothes, though still coarse and simple, seem less stained, and her nose no longer picks up the overwhelming smell of urine and feces that used to linger constantly in the air. The use of the bath expands beyond comfort. Constanza observes that the men now use it to wash and treat their work injuries, the blisters, cuts and scrapes that, if ignored, could easily turn into serious infections, something all too common at the time. The warmth of the water has become associated with healing, not merely pleasure, a thermal promise of recovery. The widening circle of care reaches a more sophisticated level of preventive health. Constanza teaches the women to boil their children's clothes in large iron cauldrons, adding ashes and some of her stronger herbs, like peppermint, to disinfect them and leave a pleasant scent behind. She explains that boiling destroys the tiny worms and invisible impurities that cling to fabric, a piece of traditional knowledge that, in practice, is an early form of sterilization. The sound of water bubbling inside the cauldrons, new to the village's soundscape, slowly becomes a reassuring noise, a sign of maternal vigilance and safety. This disinfecting process connects the individual to the collective. Clean clothing reduces the spread of skin infections and parasites, which benefits everyone. Constanza uses a poetic metaphor to reinforce the idea. If a spider's web is dirty, the fly gets stuck. If each strand is clean and strong, the fly moves on. That gentle repetition of simple yet powerful concepts helps anchor the new habit in the villagers' minds. The subtle contrast between old disorder and new order is most visible in Guillem's stone pen. The smell of manure is now contained in one controlled place, transformed into a resource instead of something that randomly dirties the village. The cool, organized stone under one's touch is a quiet reminder of humanity's ability to bring order to nature, a visible sign of progress. Seeing Guillem not only as a blacksmith but also as the village's waste manager is proof that leadership can emerge from unexpected places. The success of the initiative in Auvray begins to spread. Travelers and small merchants passing through the village pause, surprised by the unusual cleanliness. They notice the faint scent of herbs in the air and the absence of mud and waste in the lanes. One traveler in particular, a monk on his way to a monastery in Aquitaine, stops to ask Constanza about the secret of Auvray's health. Constanza answers with quiet composure, explaining that the secret isn't magical but practical. It's the clean water from the well and the effort of man in caring for what God placed in his hands. The body, like the home, needs order to thrive. The monk, impressed by her wisdom and simplicity, compares the new pen and the manure pit to the sanitation systems used in older monasteries, where waste was carefully controlled through stone channels. This growing reputation attracts more merchants and travelers, indirectly strengthening the village's economy. Cleanliness, once only a hygiene project, gradually becomes a social and economic asset. The villagers feel safer, prouder, and more prosperous. Even the sound of travelers' footsteps on the firmer, less muddy ground becomes a welcoming rhythm. That night, Constanza ends her day watching the moonlight reflected on the clean surface of the well. The water, once cloudy and dangerous, is now a dark, steady mirror reflecting the sky. The poetic closing image is of the community gathered around the bathhouse, glowing from the fire used to heat the water, a beacon of warmth and purification. The night silence is broken only by the soft crackle of burning wood, a quiet sound of comfort and serenity. The narrative slows, settling into a contemplative pause at midday, the moment when the sun is at its peak and most of Auvray withdraws to rest and eat. Constanza steps away from the hum of household chores and walks toward the stream's edge, not to work, but to sit in silence and observe. The slowed rhythm and the warmth of the sun on her skin invite her to reflect on the subtle impact of her mission. The sound of the water, once just background noise, now becomes a steady, soothing murmur, an echo of purity. She sits on a smooth stone by the water, feeling the coolness of the rock beneath her body and watching the way sunlight dances across the stream's clear surface. This small cultural observation reveals the community's new relationship with water. The villagers no longer see the stream simply as a raw resource, but as a sacred boundary that must be protected. The new disposal routines and the bathhouse ensure that the water flowing toward the village remains clean. Constanza focuses on the sound of the running water, letting the gentle repetition lead her into a meditative state. She remembers that in the Middle Ages, the idea of pure water was often tied to religion, with springs and fountains dedicated to saints. Yet the practical side of cleanliness was frequently overlooked. In Auvray, the order has reversed. The practical act of cleaning has become a new kind of devotion to health. Her sense of smell fills with the scent of warm earth and the faint trace of cardamom still lingering on her hands, left over from the oil she prepared earlier. She touches the surface of the stream and feels its lightness, its coolness, a striking contrast to the thickness of the well water before it was cleaned. The warmth of the stone and the chill of the water create a gentle thermal contrast that soothes her. In a small act of cultural observation, she notices a group of children playing far from the stream, in a freshly swept field, rather than in the mud near the well. They're tossing small stones in a game, and their clothes, though patched, are noticeably cleaner. This shift in where they choose to play is a powerful sign that cleanliness has altered not just the community's health, but its social habits as well. The stillness of midday is broken only by the slow buzz of an insect and the soft murmuring of the water. Constanza closes her eyes, taking in the fullness of the moment. The hardest work of construction and cleaning is done. Now the focus is on maintenance, on the constancy of small, steady habits. The village feels as if it has found a new balance. The sound of silence, filled only with the murmuring of the stream and the slow buzzing of insects in the warm afternoon, allows Constanza to sense the new rhythm of life in Auvray, a rhythm that has grown slower and more deliberate. Her light cultural observation extends to food. She notices that after cleaning the well, the villagers have begun washing their vegetables and fruits with greater care. This small but meaningful shift is the natural extension of clean water, a quiet acknowledgement that health begins at the source and continues onto the table. Her sense of smell no longer catches the sour odor of rotting produce near the houses, a sign that organic waste is also being handled with more attention. Constanza rises, feeling the fullness of having completed her initial mission. She walks slowly back toward the village, the heat of the setting sun already softening. The scene that greets her has a pastoral grace. The villagers still work, but with a new sense of dignity. She sees Bernard, the once stubborn old man, sitting on a newly built wooden bench near the well, carefully washing his hands and face with the clean water before eating his bread. A gesture that was rare before has become a daily ritual he performs with pride, savoring the cool freshness of the water on his skin, a quiet touch of serenity in his life. The young woman remembers the miller's cough, once a constant source of her anxiety, and now the night's silence is a sound of peace. She knows illnesses will still come. Medicine in their era is limited, but both frequency and severity have decreased, a fact the village elders mention with awe. They attribute the improvement to the blessing of the water, unaware of the science behind it, but Constanza accepts their explanation. The result is the same. Cleaning the well and building the bathhouse transformed the fear of illness into a communal practice of prevention. The smooth feel of the bathhouse's wooden walls, worn by frequent use, is physical proof of success. The rustic but functional structure has become the village's new monument, a small beacon of warmth and cleansing. At the end of the day, Constanza walks home, breathing in the gentle aroma of smoke rising from the hearths, mixed with the scent of cooked food and dried herbs. She sits at her table, looking at her glass jar filled with bath oil, and runs her fingers along its cool surface. The slow rhythm of her heartbeat and the quiet peace within her invite her into rest. Chapter 7 closes with the calm, poetic image of Auvre's well reflecting the full moon rising in the sky. There is no more mud on its surface, only dark, clear water acting as a mirror for the night's serenity, a symbol of how outer purity reflects inner peace. The depth of the night's silence becomes a sound of well-earned rest. The tranquility now settled over Auvre invites a new perspective, a shift in focus toward a character who, until now, remained in the background. Amaury, the miller, whose rough cough had once been the sound of the village's former unease. Amaury, a quiet man in his early 50s, is no longer confined to his home by illness. He stands in his mill, the heart of the village's flour production, a setting shaped by its own distinct sensory world, where the air is thick with the dry, dusty scent of ground grain, and the steady, rhythmic turning of the great millstones has become a new backdrop to the village's prosperity. Fresh sensations and a different point of view emerge from this shift toward the mill. The fine, warm flour clinging to Amaury's hands is a constant texture he feels against his skin and inhales with every breath. The flour dust, though a sign of work, is also a threat to his lungs. He realizes that while clean water has eased his intestinal and skin ailments, the cleanliness of his workspace is the next challenge, a more specialized form of hygiene. Amaury recalls a story he once heard from a passing traveler years ago, a faint memory about the water mills in Italy during the 12th century, where millers regularly washed their millstones to ensure a whiter flour and to prevent contamination by small insects. It was a detail he had dismissed at the time, but now, in Auvre's new mindset, it echoes with meaning. He begins to make small changes. He uses the clean stream water, diverted toward the mill through a simple wooden channel built with Guillem's help, not only to wash the grain before grinding, a step that helps remove soil and impurities, but also to clean the mill's stone floor. The sound of water being scrubbed across the ground, a cleansing rhythm mingling with the heavy hum of the millstones, becomes a new kind of melody inside the mill. Constanza visits, feeling the heat produced by the turning stones and breathing in the dense scent of flour hanging in the air. She isn't there to criticize, but to offer help, teaching Amori to use a damp cloth infused with peppermint to wipe down the beams and corners where small rodents used to nest. The sharp, fresh aroma of peppermint cuts through the heavy, almost rancid smell of accumulated grain. This new perspective reveals that cleanliness is not just about water and the body, it extends to the entire environment. Amori's health is vital to the village. He is the one who produces their most essential food. The mill's cleanliness, then, becomes an act of public health. The touch of the mill's wooden beams, once coated in a layer of grime and oil, now feels smoother and lighter beneath the hand. The collaboration between Amori and Constanza at the mill unfolds into a small, human story of overcoming fatalism. When the miller sees the amount of debris and tiny insects removed from the millstones and the floor after cleaning with the diverted stream water, he's shocked by what he once accepted as normal. His sense of smell, long accustomed to mold and dust, now captures the fresh scent of water and peppermint, and this sensory shift becomes his strongest motivation to maintain order. He realizes that the respiratory illness that plagued him wasn't fate, but a direct consequence of the dusty, infested environment. The touch of clean, cold water on the millstones, which he scrubs with a coarse, bristled brush, becomes a repetitive gesture that calms him. He establishes a new rhythm. With every break in the grinding, he cleans. The mill's sound, once a single, dull note, is now interrupted by the gentle whisper of running water and the soft murmur of cleaning, a subtle counterpoint that signals more mindful work. This glimpse into medieval industrial hygiene carries real significance. The quality of flour depended on the cleanliness of both grain and mill. The darker, coarser flour common among peasants was often contaminated. By cleaning the mill, Amori is improving not only his health, but also the quality of Ovre's bread. The sight of flour sacks now visibly lighter in color with a fresher smell becomes the final proof of Constanza's influence. The young woman spends most of the afternoon at the mill, not working the machinery, but advising Amori on ventilation. She suggests opening the mill's small gaps on dry days to allow air to circulate, a practice that, without his knowing, helps disperse the fine flour particles that irritated his lungs. Sunlight streaming through the slats illuminates the dust motes dancing in the air, a sight the miller, for the first time, associates with danger rather than simple work. The miller's side story weaves itself into the larger tapestry. Amori's improving health and the better flour become new topics of conversation in the village, reinforcing the value of cleanliness. Guillem joins them at dusk, breathing in the fresh peppermint scent inside the mill, and the two men, the once skeptic and the recently ill, form a new pact of mutual care, discussing the idea of building a small annex to store grain in a drier, better protected space. Chapter 8 closes with Amori stepping away from his mill at nightfall, his cough now barely noticeable, feeling the coolness of water on his hands, and smelling the fresh bread he can finally bake with purer flour. The closing image is the great mill wheel turning slowly under the moonlight, rinsed continuously by stream water, a symbol of a cycle of work and purification renewed day after day. The night's silence brings a deep peace, the sound of restored health. The narrative shifts toward an amplification of the senses at a particular moment of the day, twilight. Constanza finds herself in the herb garden, a space full of new sensations that she has tended with meticulous care over the past months. Her sense of smell heightens with the sharp, citrusy scent of rue blending with the spicy aroma of thyme. Plants that in the Middle Ages were used not only for medicine, but to ward off evil spirits and insects, creating an aromatic shield around the home. The cool evening air carries a refreshing chill she has grown to cherish. Enriching the sensory landscape is the goal. Constanza uses her hands to crush a handful of dried lavender, releasing its fragrant oils, then tucks the petals into small linen sachets to hang inside homes, perfuming the air and keeping moths and fleas away. This is a curious medieval custom, the use of sweet herbs, pomanders or sachets as a popular hygiene practice meant to purify the air and, indirectly, the body, rooted in the belief that pleasant scents were signs of health. Sound weaves itself gently into the scene, the soft buzzing of bees making slow, rhythmic rounds among the last flowers of the day. Their steady hum, mixed with the distant murmur of villagers settling indoors, forms an auditory tapestry of peace. Constanza feels the warmth of the fading sunlight on her skin and the cool touch of approaching night. She moves slowly back toward the village, carrying the small herb sachets. On the path, she meets Guillem, the blacksmith, who, for the first time, is washing his face and neck in a basin of water, using the rustic soap Constanza taught him to make from ashes. The contrast in his gestures, once rough and rushed, now slow and deliberate, is proof of a changing habit. He feels the soft glide of the soap across his skin, a sensation of cleanliness he now associates with well-being. Guillem comments on the absence of flies and the noticeable decline of small rodents inside the homes, something he attributes to the strong scent of herbs Constanza has distributed and to the cleaned drainage channels. She smiles, knowing that the true cause is the removal of dirt that once attracted pests, but the pleasant fragrance of the herbs makes the change easier for him to accept. The amplification of the senses deepens as Constanza and Guillem walk toward the waste disposal area, the clay-lined pit built far from the village. The smell of decomposition, which would normally be strong and repulsive, is softened by the mixture of lime and ashes they scatter over the refuse, a custom that, without their knowledge, reduced acidity and bacterial growth, acting as a primitive form of waste treatment. Her sense of smell catches the subtle difference, the scent of damp earth and the mild sharpness of lime rising above the odor of rot, a sign that filth is being controlled and transformed. Constanza notices a curious medieval custom now taking shape, the use of nose guards, small cloths perfumed with herbs, by those who worked near the pit, a practice meant to protect themselves from the bad airs believed to carry disease. She, however, knows that by controlling the smell, they are in fact reducing exposure to pathogens. She smiles at Guillem, who happens to be using one of those cloths, and praises him for his instinctive wisdom in using what nature provides. The dry earth beneath their feet and the lingering warmth of the sun envelop them. Sound weaves into the scene, the chirping of crickets and the soft stirring of wind through the trees, a gentle noise that, in the stillness of the countryside, underscores the newly established order. Waste is now confined, no longer scattered, and the sounds of nearby wildlife indicate a restored ecological balance, with the stream running clean. Constanza recalls how medieval concern with air and odor was a form of sensory hygiene. Anything that smelled foul was considered dangerous. A slow shift in the scene occurs as twilight yields to night. Constanza and Guillem step away from the pit, the sharp scent of lime clinging to their clothes, and return to the heart of the village. She recognizes that health is not merely the absence of illness, but the presence of order and beauty. The cool, gentle touch of night air against her face is a soothing relief after the heat of the day. Chapter 9 closes with the young woman inside her home, hanging the last lavender sachet above her bed. The fresh floral aroma fills her small room, inviting peaceful sleep. The poetic, soothing image is that of the stars, brighter and more numerous in Auvray's sky, reflecting on the clean surface of the village well, a symbol of celestial order mirrored in earthly order. The silence that follows is a sound of peace and well-earned rest. The slow shift in the scene reveals itself through the changing weather. The gentle Gallic summer fades, and the village of Auvray steps into autumn, a season marked by softened light and an emotional temperature that turns more introspective. The morning sun is now paler and less penetrating, casting long bluish shadows that hint at the cold drawing near. Constanza feels the drier, crisper air on her skin, a stark contrast to the damp warmth of previous months, and the scent of decaying leaves and moist earth replaces the floral fragrance of summer. This change in light, climate, and emotional tone is subtle, yet it reshapes the rhythm of cleanliness. The bathhouse becomes more cherished, not just for hygiene, but for warmth, transforming into a refuge against the cold settling over the land. Constanza gently reinforces the idea, repeating to the villagers that the warmth of clean water drives the chill from your bones and the sickness from winter, a metaphor that binds physical comfort to preventive health. The focus returns to gathering water from the stream. With autumn's arrival, the rains grow heavier, and while the water remains clear, it flows faster and carries more sediment and fallen leaves. Guillem and Amaury work side by side to improve the simple wooden channel that brings water to the mill and the bathhouse. They add a screen made of thin twigs at its mouth, a primitive filter, to catch leaves and larger debris. The sound of water striking the screen becomes a new rhythmic noise along the stream, a sound of care and maintenance. Constanza watches their work, feeling the cool, damp wood beneath her fingers. She remembers that the constant threat of contaminated water during winter, when illness spread more easily, was a familiar medieval fear. By refining the system, they aren't just building a filter, they're building a protective barrier against the darker season ahead. This gradual shift in climate strengthens the need for order and preparation. The smell of burning firewood, now rising more frequently from the chimneys, mingles with the scent of dried herbs that Constanza hangs from the beams of her home as winter approaches. The use of aromatic oils and herbs in the bath increases as well, their fragrance helping to counter the heavy, stale air of shuttered houses. The slow shift in the season brings with it the need to store and protect supplies from moisture and cold, a new, practical focus for hygiene. Constanza emphasizes the importance of keeping firewood and hay dry and raised off the ground, feeling the texture of the wood and the crisp straw between her fingers. This simple act helps prevent mold and keeps rodents at bay, creatures that grow more active as the weather cools. She explains that order in storage is an act of fire prevention and sickness prevention alike, using the language of safety and survival that resonates with the villagers. She turns her attention to cooking, one of the essential pillars of medieval life, which is now directly affected by cleanliness. With the purer flour provided by Amaury and clean water at hand, the quality of bread and soups improves noticeably. Her sense of smell picks up the fresher, cleaner aroma of the food, and the bread in her hands feels soft and light, a striking difference from the dense, slightly sour loaves made from the old flour. This subtle improvement in their meals becomes another form of health she connects to the newly cleaned mill and the restored well. Constanza gently reinforces the slow introduction of heated drinking water. She advises everyone to drink warm herbal teas more often throughout the day, not only for warmth, but to wash the body from the inside and push away the bad humors that tend to gather during winter. This practice, once common among certain monks and hermits, now enters the village as a daily ritual of health, a soft and continual reminder of purification. The sound of warm liquid being sipped slowly becomes a comforting note in the cool quiet of autumn. She watches Bernard and Guillaume seal the gaps in their homes with mud and straw, an act meant to conserve heat, but one that also improves ventilation and prevents insects and small animals from entering. This image of collective effort, everyone preparing their homes for winter, reinforces the idea that order and cleanliness have become a shared value, not merely Constance's personal concern. The sensation of warmth and safety inside these sealed homes becomes the village's new standard of comfort. Chapter 10 closes with the young woman in her own home, looking out the small window at a village settling in under the soft light of dusk. She smells the drying herbs and feels the lingering warmth from the hearth, a deep sense of comfort and peace. As she lies down, a quiet certainty fills her. The fight against filth is, at its core, a fight for life. The final image is the gentle steam rising from the bathhouse in the crisp autumn air, a constant reminder of the warmth and cleanliness the community has worked so hard to claim. The narrative shifts into its closing phase as winter tightens its grip, bringing a sense of quiet retreat over Auvray. Daylight is brief and grey, and the air carries a sharp, biting cold that pushes the community indoors. Constanza turns her attention to reinforcing the habits that protect everyone during this critical season, breathing in the strong, comforting smell of wood smoke that hangs heavy in the air. The focus gently returns to earlier elements, tying the success of the cleaned well to the village's present well-being. Using the purified water, Constanza prepares a large batch of solid soap by mixing rendered animal fat with lye made from wood ash, a common medieval method. She hands out the hard, pale bars to each family, insisting that washing hands with warm water, even in the cold, is essential to keeping illness away. The rough texture of the soap and its strong scent of fat and ash become the fragrances of prevention. She spends time with the village women, reviewing how to use the herbs. She reminds them to hang small bags of lavender and mint by windows and doors, and to let some burn gently in the hearth, reinforcing the idea that the bad winter airs must be met with good protective scents. Softly, she repeats that cleanliness begins at the doorstep and continues through the body. A final historical touch slips naturally into the scene. Constanza recalls that medieval physicians, influenced by the writings of Hippocrates and Galen, often recommended diet and bathing as ways to balance the body's humors, especially in winter, when the cold increased the phlegmatic humor. She translates this complex idea into simple, practical language for her neighbors. Warm baths and heated herbs warm the body and push away the damp heaviness of winter. Constanza feels the cold, humid air on her face and realizes that her final challenge is fighting the winter's pull toward stillness. She works with Guillaume and Amaury to store extra dry firewood near the bathhouse, making sure the heat remains accessible, a quiet promise of relief and comfort as the season reaches its peak. The sight of the bathhouse roof dusted with snow, yet with steam curling upward into the sky, stands as a beacon of warmth. Winter's deep quiet heightens everyone's reliance on fire and warmth, and Constanza uses this moment to strengthen the village's approach to hygiene even further. She teaches the villagers to clean their hearths regularly, removing cold ashes and burnt wood scraps that, if left to pile up, could attract insects and rats. She explains that a clean hearth burns hotter and more efficiently, producing more warmth and less heavy smoke, which improves the air inside their homes, a vital concern in a time with little to no ventilation. The metallic scrape of the iron shovel against the stone hearth becomes a familiar sound of prevention and comfort. The emotional climate of the village, though calm, carries a serene anticipation for winter's end. Amaury, the miller, continues providing purer flour, and Guilhem makes sure the bathhouse is always stocked with firewood. The sight of the three, Constanza, Guilhem, and Amaury, working side by side to safeguard the community's well-being, marks the quiet climax of their shared human story. They've become the silent pillars of a new order, where cleanliness isn't an obsession, but the foundation of daily life. Constanza devotes part of her days to preparing a special infusion for the season's final stretch, using the last of the cardamom and ginger seeds she brought from Vaucresson. She brews a large pot and shares it widely, saying its strong, spicy aroma will wake the blood that winter put to sleep, a gentle metaphor for boosting energy and immunity. The villagers breathe in its sharp, exotic fragrance, a refreshing contrast to the smoke and faint winter mold that linger in their homes. The final image of this chapter's preparation is the children of Auvray, who, despite the cold, are healthier and livelier than ever. Their skin is free of the sores and rashes that were once so common before the clean water and the baths. This image becomes Constanza's quiet proof of victory. The absence of illness is her greatest triumph. The sound of their laughter, soft but bright even in the frigid air, is the sweetest melody she could hope for. Chapter 11 settles into a gentle expectation of what comes next, carrying the certainty that the order she helped build will endure through winter's final stretch. That night, she lies down, feeling the warmth of the last glowing embers and the soft scent of dried herbs near her bed, knowing spring will bring a full renewal, but the seed of cleanliness has already been planted. The soft touch of a clean linen sheet against her skin feels like a small luxury she has earned for herself and the entire village. A sense of peace and natural closure settles over Constanza and the entire village of Auvray as the first signs of spring arrive. The warmer, steadier touch of the sun begins to melt the last patches of snow, and the gentle drip of thawing water falling from rooftops becomes a new melody of hope. The smell of damp, waking earth, mixed with the faint aroma of tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, replaces the heavy, enclosed scent of winter. The narrative circles back to the story's early images without naming them, showing how deeply the village has changed. Where the air once carried the sharp, sour odor of waste lingering in the lanes, now there's the clean scent of running water and the soft fragrance of herbs beginning to sprout. The ground beneath Constanza's feet feels firmer, less muddy, the result of the new drainage system Guilhem built, now proven against meltwater and spring rains. She pauses by the well. The water stands higher and slightly cloudy from surface runoff, but thanks to the sealing and cleaning they did, no sludge has settled and the cloudiness fades quickly, revealing clear water once more. She remembers the fear she once felt at the sight of that murky surface, and now feels a calm assurance as she looks into its purity. The well, reflecting the pale blue spring sky, looks like a mirror of tranquility. Her thoughts drift gently between past and present. She remembers how dirt was once seen as a curse, when in truth it had only been a matter of disorder and lack of knowledge. The sickness of the past was the result of neglect, the health of the present, the direct result of collective care and practical organization. She realizes that true wisdom wasn't in searching for miracles, but in applying the simple logic of cleanliness. Children's laughter rings louder and brighter than before. They run freely across the open fields, heading toward the bathhouse that still serves as the village's gathering place, where warmth and the scent of herbs offer comfort and renewal. The soft, fresh breeze brushing against Constance's face feels like a gentle release after a long winter of confinement. She meets Amaury and Guillem near the stone pen, now filled with fully cured manure, ready to be spread across the fields. They talk about the upcoming planting season with a quiet confidence, knowing that transforming waste into nourishment will bring a richer harvest. Constance's sense of smell picks up the deep, earthy aroma of the cured fertilizer, an unexpected scent of prosperity. The three stand together for a moment, sharing a silent satisfaction in witnessing the cycle completed. A sense of peace and natural closure settles over Constanza and the entire village of Auvray as the first signs of spring arrive. The warmer, steadier touch of the sun begins to melt the last patches of snow, and the gentle drip of thawing water falling from rooftops becomes a new melody of hope. The smell of damp, waking earth, mixed with the faint aroma of tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, replaces the heavy, enclosed scent of winter. The narrative circles back to the story's early images without naming them, showing how deeply the village has changed. Where the air once carried the sharp, sour odor of waste lingering in the lanes, now there's the clean scent of running water and the soft fragrance of herbs beginning to sprout. The ground beneath Constance's feet feels firmer, less muddy, the result of the new drainage system Guillem built, now proven against meltwater and spring rains. She pauses by the well. The water stands higher and slightly cloudy from surface runoff, but thanks to the sealing and cleaning they did, no sludge has settled, and the cloudiness fades quickly, revealing clear water once more. She remembers the fear she once felt at the sight of that murky surface, and now feels a calm assurance as she looks into its purity. The well, reflecting the pale blue spring sky, looks like a mirror of tranquility. Her thoughts drift gently between past and present. She remembers how dirt was once seen as a curse, when in truth it had only been a matter of disorder and lack of knowledge. The sickness of the past was the result of neglect. The health of the present, the direct result of collective care and practical organization. She realizes that true wisdom wasn't in searching for miracles but in applying the simple logic of cleanliness. Children's laughter rings louder and brighter than before. They run freely across the open fields, heading toward the bathhouse that still serves as the village's gathering place, where warmth and the scent of herbs offer comfort and renewal. The soft, fresh breeze brushing against Constance's face feels like a gentle release after a long winter of confinement. She meets Amaury and Guillem near the stone pen, now filled with fully cured manure ready to be spread across the fields. They talk about the upcoming planting season with a quiet confidence, knowing that transforming waste into nourishment will bring a richer harvest. Constance's sense of smell picks up the deep, earthy aroma of the cured fertilizer, an unexpected scent of prosperity. The days following the return of spring bring a different kind of light into Constance's small cabin. The morning sun filters through the herbs hanging from the beams, casting soft golden patterns on the wooden walls. It feels as if the light itself carries a quiet blessing, settling over a home that has learned to breathe again. The creek, which had been restrained and icy through the winter, now runs with new vigor. Its lively current splashes against the stones, filling the air with a crisp sound that reaches every corner of the village, a reminder that life, once slowed by cold, is beginning to pulse again. Women spread freshly washed clothes across open fields, letting the wind lift the fabric as if waving gentle flags of peace. The clean scent of handmade soap mixes with the fragrance of cut grass, creating an aroma that announces the new season better than any calendar. Amori returns to his mill with renewed calm. He runs his hand along the great wooden wheel as if greeting an old companion. The dust that once suffocated him now feels less threatening, and his work carries a new mindfulness shaped by all he has learned. Guillem sharpens the village tools, and the metallic rasp of metal against stone forms a steady rhythm that echoes softly across the fields. It blends with the morning air, a subtle soundtrack to the community's awakening. The stone pen, built with so much determination, now shelters the animals in clean order. Constanza pauses by the gate and observes the pigs resting on fresh straw, something unimaginable in the chaotic days before the village's transformation. The children, always quick to adapt, turn hygiene into a kind of game. They race toward the creek to wash their hands before eating, giggling as the cold water runs between their fingers. What began as instruction becomes instinct, weaving itself effortlessly into childhood. The bathhouse, though no longer a refuge from the winter cold, remains a place of comfort. People enter less hurriedly now, drawn not only to the warmth of the water, but to the quiet companionship found there. In a quiet corner of the village, Constanza begins planting more delicate herbs, dill, lemon balm, and other soft-scented plants. She tends to them with the same reverence one gives to sacred objects, knowing they will one day soothe wounds, season meals, or perfume the air. The entire village discovers that their senses have sharpened. Where once there was only the stench of mud and waste, now subtle fragrances appear: sweet fennel, dried lavender, sun-warmed hay. The change feels miraculous, though it was born of nothing more than persistence and care. At night, Constanza looks up and notices stars she had never seen before. The air, lighter and cleaner, reveals constellations once hidden behind smoke and neglect. She wonders if the sky was always this breathtaking, or if clarity on the ground helps reveal beauty above. The elders sit by the well, talking in slow voices about the past. They speak with astonishment, as if discovering that what they once endured was not fate, but habit. Their acceptance of old ways has been replaced with curiosity about new ones. During one such gathering, old Mariette tells Constanza she slept a full night without coughing, a simple confession that moves the young woman deeply. Sometimes healing arrives in whispers, not proclamations. The well, once a source of fear, has become a symbol of renewal. People approach it with reverence, not out of superstition but gratitude. Clean water, once a dream, now flows freely. Even the fields seem changed. Barley shoots appear greener, straighter, almost proud. Perhaps it is coincidence, or perhaps the villagers' careful habits inspire greater attention in the fields too. Travelers who pass through comment on the village's gentle fragrance, something rare in medieval life. They ask if a saint watches over Auvray, and the villagers smile, sometimes glancing toward Constanza, who always steps back, humbled and shy. Birds, drawn by the clear water, begin visiting the creek again. Their wings skim the surface lightly as they drink, their fluttering creating a delicate music that mingles with the water's soft murmur. One afternoon, Constanza kneels beside the creek and whispers a quiet thank you, not for miracles but for constancy, for the strength to insist, to teach, to guide, for a community that learned to choose care over resignation. As days pass, the village's new order becomes so natural that no one remembers exactly when the change began. The transformation is so complete it feels as though Auvray has always been this way, clean, harmonious, alive. And when Constanza walks home at dusk, the air rich with the scent of herbs and warm earth, she feels certain that the story of Auvry has finally found its peace. The village breathes, thrives and blossoms because someone once believed that cleanliness was the first step toward health, and health was the first step toward hope. Until tomorrow, traveler. I'll be waiting for you to walk with me through these forgotten eras, through these moments of quiet courage and unexpected humanity. You already know where to find me. Right here, waiting at the threshold between history and dream. If you enjoyed this journey, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Rest well, traveler. May peace be with you.